Commander Tamin stood at the edge of the massive docking bay, watching as alien ships unlike anything Earth had ever seen filled the space around them. The Valthak Empire's fleet stretched endlessly into the dark void, each vessel covered in sharp spikes and glowing red symbols that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Remember," Tamin whispered to his small team of diplomats behind him, "we're here to make friends, not enemies. These people have ruled this part of space for over 1,000 years." The airlock hissed open, and immediately the temperature dropped. Cold air rushed in, carrying scents of metal and something else, something wild and dangerous. Heavy footsteps echoed from within the alien ship, each one making the floor beneath their feet vibrate slightly. Then she appeared. Princess Kestra emerged from the shadows like something from humanity's darkest legends. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her body covered in thick, dark red scales that caught the light like polished stone. 4 muscular arms extended from her torso, each one ending in clawed hands that could probably crush a human skull without effort. Her face was angular and sharp, with golden eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Across her body, ceremonial armor made from some unknown black metal was etched with symbols of her countless victories in battle. Behind her came a dozen other Valthak nobles, each one imposing in their own right, but none commanded attention, like their princess. These were the beings who had conquered entire star systems, who had never known defeat in combat, who viewed most other species as nothing more than amusing pets or annoying insects. Tamin's throat went dry, but he forced himself to step forward. Hearth's entire future might depend on the next few minutes. The princess stopped just a few feet away from him, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns carved into her scales, close enough to smell the scent of ozone and something metallic that clung to her armor. "Princess Kestra," Tamin began, his voice steadier than he felt, "thank you for agreeing to meet with us. On behalf of Earth and all humanity, I'm honored to be in the presence of someone so beautiful." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Princess Kestra jerked backward as if she'd been struck, her 4 arms spreading wide in what looked like a defensive posture. Her golden eyes widened in what could only be described as shock, maybe even confusion. For several long seconds, she simply stared at him, her mouth slightly open. The other Valthak nobles began whispering among themselves in their own language, their voices creating a low, buzzing sound that filled the docking bay. Some of them seemed angry, others appeared confused, and a few looked almost amused by the human's strange words. "What did you say?" Princess Kestra finally managed, her voice deep and rough, like distant thunder. "I said you're beautiful," Tamin repeated, wondering if perhaps their translation devices weren't working properly. The princess took another step back, her clawed hands clenching and unclenching. "Beautiful?" She repeated the word like it was something foreign, something she'd never heard before. "Humans call warriors beautiful?" Around her, the other nobles continued their whispered conversations, some of them pointing at Tamin with what looked like a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. In their culture, warriors were called many things: feared, deadly, victorious, unstoppable, but never beautiful. Beauty was something soft, something weak, something that had no place in their harsh world of conquest and battle. "No one," Princess Kestra said slowly, "has ever called me that word before." 3 days had passed since that awkward first meeting, and Princess Kestra still couldn't get the human's words out of her head. Beautiful. The word echoed in her mind during training, during meals, even during sleep. No Valthak had ever been called beautiful. It made no sense. Standing in the center of the great arena, surrounded by thousands of cheering Valthak spectators, she decided it was time to test these strange creatures from Earth. If they wanted an alliance, they would have to prove they weren't just another weak species looking for protection. "Humans," her voice boomed across the arena floor, "you claim to be worthy partners, but we Valthak only respect strength. You will face our trials of combat, survive, and we will consider your proposal, fail, and return to your small world." Tamin looked around the massive arena. The walls rose 50 feet high, covered with the carved faces of legendary Valthak warriors. In the stands, thousands of aliens watched with hungry eyes, waiting to see the humans crushed like so many others before them. His small team looked terrified, and honestly, he didn't blame them. "I accept," Tamin called out, his voice barely. Carrying in the huge space, Princess Kestra's golden eyes narrowed. "You? Alone? If that's what it takes." The first challenge was simple enough. Cross a field filled with spinning blades while carrying a heavy stone. Tamin watched the pattern for several minutes, noting the timing, the spaces between the deadly metal. Where a Valthak would charge through using brute strength and thick scales for protection, Tamin waited, then darted between the blades with quick, precise movements. The crowd murmured in surprise as the small human made it across without a scratch. The second trial involved climbing a wall, while defenders threw spears. Again, Tamin used his smaller size and human agility, finding handholds too small for Valthak claws and moving in ways their bulkier bodies couldn't match. When spears flew toward him, he didn't try to block them like a warrior. He simply wasn't where they expected him to be. Princess Kestra found herself leaning forward in her seat, studying this strange creature's movements. He fought like no warrior she'd ever seen, using speed and intelligence instead of strength and armor. The third trial changed everything. As Tamin faced a group of mechanical training drones, something went wrong. The machines malfunctioned, sparks flying as they spun out of control. Instead of staying in the arena, they broke through the safety barriers and headed straight for the civilian viewing section, where Valthak families had brought their younglings to watch. Without thinking, Tamin abandoned his trial and sprinted toward the danger. A massive drone, easily 3 times his size, was bearing down on a group of young Valthak who had been pushed against a wall with nowhere to run. Their parents screamed, trying to reach them, but the chaos made it impossible. Tamin threw himself between the machine and the children. The drone's metal arm struck him hard, sending him flying into the wall. Pain shot through his ribs, but he got back up, placing himself in front of the younglings again. This time he grabbed a fallen piece of debris and jammed it into the machine's sensor array, causing it to spin wildly before finally shutting down. The arena fell silent. Princess Kestra stared in disbelief. The human had given up his own trial, risked his life, possibly ruined any chance of alliance, all to save Valthak. Children of a species he'd met only days ago. Later, in the medical bay, she found him having his ribs bandaged. The moment they were alone, she grabbed him by the shoulders with 2 of her forearms. "Why?" she demanded. "Why did you call me beautiful? And why did you save our young? You could have died. Your mission could have failed. Why?" Tamin looked up at her, wincing slightly from his injuries. "Because that's what humans do. We protect those who need protection, regardless of species. And I called you beautiful because that's what you are. Someone strong enough to defend others. That's the most beautiful thing I know." The emergency alarm started screaming at 3 in the morning, jolting everyone awake throughout the Valthak command station. Red lights flashed in the corridors as soldiers ran to their positions, their heavy footsteps echoing like thunder through the metal halls. Tamin rushed to the main control room, still pulling on his jacket. Princess Kestra was already there, her forearms moving rapidly across multiple control panels as she analyzed incoming reports. Her golden eyes reflected the red warning lights, making her look even more intimidating than usual. "What's happening?" Tamin asked, slightly out of breath. "The Zephan Collective," Kestra growled without looking up. "They've launched simultaneous attacks on both our territories and yours. 12 human colonies are under assault, and they've hit our outer defense stations." Tamin felt his stomach drop. The Zephan were notorious across the galaxy, a hive-minded species that consumed entire worlds, turning everything into their twisted biomechanical ships. They didn't negotiate, didn't take prisoners, and didn't stop until everything was either dead or converted. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Maybe 6 hours before they reach the main population centers." Kestra finally turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked genuinely worried. "My father wants to pull back our forces to defend only Valthak worlds. Your Earth Command is probably doing the same thing." Tamin stared at the tactical display showing the enemy's positions. Dozens of red dots were moving steadily inward, toward both human and Valthak territories. If both sides only defended their own space, The Zephon would easily defeat them, one at a time. That's suicide, he said quietly. We need to work together. Work together. Kestra's voice carried a mixture of surprise and doubt. Humans and Valthak have never fought side by side. Our tactics, our weapons, our entire way of warfare is different. Then we'll have to figure it out fast. For the next 4 hours they worked without stopping. The command room became their world as they studied star charts, analyzed fleet positions, and planned coordinated strikes. Tamin quickly learned that Valthak military strategy was all about overwhelming force. Hit the enemy hard and fast with everything you have. Human tactics, on the other hand, focused on flexibility and using the enemy's strength against them. Your people fight like a storm, Tamin observed, watching Kestra plan a direct assault. Powerful, unstoppable, but straightforward. And your people fight like... Kestra paused, searching for the right word. Like water. You flow around obstacles, find the weak points, adapt to whatever container you're in. As they combined their approaches, something unexpected happened. Their different styles began to complement each other perfectly. Valthak, heavy assault ships, could smash through enemy lines, while human stealth fighters slipped in behind to target critical systems. Human long-range coordination guided Valthak warriors to the most effective attack points. During a brief break, while they waited for updated intelligence reports, Kestra asked something that had clearly been bothering her. This word you used, beautiful. Explain it to me properly. In our language we have words for deadly, victorious, fearsome, unstoppable. When Valthak see me, they call me these things. But beautiful? I don't understand. Tamin looked at her carefully. Even exhausted from hours of planning, even with her armor scratched and her scales dulled from stress, there was something magnificent about her. Not just her physical presence, but the way she had immediately put aside her own people's prejudices to work with him. The way she genuinely cared about saving lives, even human lives. Beauty isn't just about how someone looks, he said slowly. It's about who they are inside. When I see you standing up for what's right, when I watch you put the safety of others before your own glory, when you're brave enough to try something new even when it's scary, that's beautiful to me. Kestra was quiet for a long moment. No one has ever seen me that way before. To everyone else, I'm just a weapon, a tool for conquest. You're not a tool, Tamin said firmly. You're a leader, someone who inspires others to be better than they thought they could be. Someone worth following into battle, not because they're afraid of you, but because they believe in you. The communication system buzzed with an incoming message. The first wave of their coordinated attack had been a success. Human and Valthak forces working together had destroyed 3 Zephon command ships and saved 2 colonies. Kestra looked at the battle reports, then at Tamin. For the first time since he'd known her, she smiled. The massive Zephon war fleet appeared on the sensors, like a dark shadow spreading across space. Hundreds of biomechanical ships, each one pulsing with sickly green light, moved in perfect formation toward the Valthak colony of Theros Prime. Home to over 2 million civilians, including thousands of younglings, the colony had no chance of defending itself against such overwhelming force. Tamin gripped the arms of his captain's chair as his ship, the Earth vessel Harmony, raced alongside Princess Kestra's flagship toward the approaching nightmare. Through the viewscreen, he could see the enemy ships growing larger by the minute, their twisted organic hulls covered in weapon ports that gleamed like hungry eyes. Tamin, came Kestra's voice over the communication system, my father is ordering all Valthak military ships to fall back to the fortress worlds. He says Theros Prime cannot be saved. What about the civilians? Tamin asked. Though he already knew the answer would make him sick, he considers them acceptable losses. Tamin closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision before him. His ship and crew were already far from home, already risking everything for people they'd never met. The smart move, the safe move, would be to follow the Valthak retreat and live to fight another day. But as he opened his eyes and looked at the peaceful blue world of Theros Prime below them, dotted with cities full of families who had no idea death was coming for them, he knew there was only one choice he could live with. All ships, this is Commander Tamin, he announced over the fleet communication channel. We're not abandoning those people. Human vessels will engage the enemy and buy time for civilian evacuation. Sir, called out his communications officer, Ji-Woo, the other human ships are requesting orders. The Valthak are retreating. We'll be facing the entire enemy fleet alone. Then, we'll face them alone. The battle that followed was unlike anything in human military history. 12 human ships against hundreds of Zephon vessels, fighting desperately to protect a world that wasn't even their own. The Harmony led the charge, her weapons blazing as she dove between massive enemy cruisers, drawing their fire away from the evacuation transport struggling to escape the planet's surface. For 20 minutes, the humans held the line. Their ships darted and weaved through the enemy formation like angry bees, striking at weak points and vulnerable systems before disappearing into the chaos of battle. Every second they bought meant another 1,000 civilians safely away from the planet. But the math was impossible. One by one, the human ships began to fall. The destroyer Hope went down fighting 3 enemy vessels at once. The cruiser Liberty sacrificed herself to ram a Zephon command ship and clear a path for evacuation transports. Finally, only the Harmony remained, her hull cracked and bleeding atmosphere, her weapons failing one by one. A massive Zephon bioship, easily 10 times her size, had locked onto her with some kind of energy beam that was slowly tearing her apart. "Sir?" reported Juan from the engineering station, his voice calm despite the sparks flying around him. "Main engines are gone. Life support is failing. We've got maybe 5 minutes before complete hull breach." Through the chaos, Tae-min could see the last evacuation transport, struggling to escape the planet's gravity well. It was packed with Valthak families, their children, pressed against the windows, probably watching the human ship die to save them. "All hands," Tae-min announced over the ship's intercom. "Prepare to abandon ship. Get to the escape pods." "What about you, sir?" asked Yunseo from the navigation station. Tae-min looked at the tactical display. The evacuation transport was still vulnerable, still within range of enemy weapons. If the Harmony's crew escaped, in the pods the transport would be defenseless. "Someone needs to keep the ship between them and that transport until it reaches safety," he said quietly. His crew exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they returned to their stations. "We're staying." "Sir," Ji-Woo said simply. "This is our choice too," added Juan. As the Harmony's hull finally began to crack apart, Princess Kestra watched from her flagship, now retreating with the rest of the Valthak fleet. She had been ordered to fall back, to preserve her forces for the defense of more important worlds. But as she watched the human ship break apart while still protecting the evacuation transport, something inside her snapped. "Turn us around," she commanded. Princess, her second-in-command, protested. "Your father's orders. My father is wrong." Her 4 hands moved across the control panels, overriding the retreat order. "All ships follow me. We're going back for them." "They're probably already dead, Princess." Kestra's golden eyes blazed with fury and determination. "Then we'll make sure they didn't die for nothing." The Valthak flagship, followed by dozens of loyal warriors who chose to follow their princess rather than their emperor, turned back toward the battle, racing against time to save the humans who had sacrificed everything for strangers. The twisted remains of the Harmony drifted silently through space, her hull split open like a broken egg. Emergency lights flickered weakly in the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the destroyed corridors. Debris floated everywhere, pieces of metal, broken equipment, and personal belongings that would never find their way home. Princess Kestra moved carefully through the wreckage, her 4 arms helping her navigate the twisted passages, while her enhanced vision searched for any sign of life. Her rescue teams had found 3 human survivors so far, all badly injured but alive, pulled from sections of the ship that had somehow maintained atmosphere. "Princess," came a voice through her communicator, "we're detecting a weak life sign in what used to be the bridge area." Kestra's heart raced as she pushed through the debris toward the command section. The bridge was completely destroyed, consoles smashed, and the ceiling collapsed in several places. But there, trapped under a fallen beam, she found him. Tae-min was unconscious, his face pale and a thin line of blood running from his forehead. His left arm was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle, and his breathing was shallow and labored. but he was alive. "Hold on," Kestra whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. Using two of her arms to lift the heavy beam and the other two to carefully pull him free, she cradled his broken body against her armored chest as she carried him toward the rescue shuttle. Taemin's eyes fluttered open. For a moment he seemed confused, unsure where he was or what had happened. Then his gaze focused on her face, and despite his injuries, despite everything they'd just been through, he smiled. "Kestra," he said weakly. Did the transport get away?" "Yes," she replied, her voice catching slightly. "All 2,000 civilians made it to safety, because of you and your crew." Taemin closed his eyes in relief. "Good. That's good." But Kestra wasn't finished. "Why?" She asked the same question that had been haunting her for weeks. "Why did you stay? Why did your people give their lives for strangers?" Taemin looked at her again, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. There was no fear there, no hatred for the Volthak who had initially abandoned the colony. Instead, there was something warm and proud, something that made her feel like she was seeing herself for the first time. "Because," he said softly, "when I look at you, I see someone worth saving people for, someone who makes others want to be better than they are." 3 weeks later, Kestra stood in the great hall of the Valthak homeworld, facing the assembled nobles and military commanders. The victory over the Zephon had been complete, their fleet destroyed, their invasion stopped. But the cost had been heavy, and the questions it raised were even heavier. "The humans fought alongside us as equals," she told the assembled crowd, "not as servants, not as tools, but as partners. They died protecting our people, asking for nothing in return." Her father, Emperor Vorthan, frowned from his throne. "They are weak creatures, Kestra. Useful perhaps, but weak." "Are they?" Kestra challenged. "They held the line against impossible odds. They gave their lives for people they'd never met. Their commander refused to abandon civilians, even when his own death was certain. If that's weakness, then I don't understand strength." She began pacing before the assembly, her forearms gesturing as she spoke with growing passion. "For 1,000 years we've conquered worlds by force. We've called ourselves strong because we could destroy others. But these humans showed me something different. They showed me that real strength isn't about how much you can take. It's about how much you're willing to give." The hall was silent. No one had ever heard the princess speak like this before. "I've been called many things," Kestra continued. "Deadly, fearsome, unstoppable, the Emperor's perfect weapon. But never once has anyone called me what that human called me. Beautiful. And I finally understand why." She stopped pacing and looked directly at her father. "He didn't see a weapon when he looked at me. He saw someone capable of inspiring others. To greatness. Someone worth following not out of fear but out of respect. Someone who could choose to protect rather than destroy." Emperor Vorthan's eyes narrowed. "You sound as if you've been infected by their weakness." "No, father. I've been infected by their strength. And I think it's time our empire learned the difference." The murmurs that rippled through the assembly were a mixture of shock, excitement, and fear. Princess Kestra, the greatest warrior in Valthak history, was suggesting they change everything about who they were. But as she looked out at the faces before her, Kestra saw something new in their eyes. The same thing she'd seen in Taemin's eyes as she pulled him from the wreckage. Not fear of her power, but hope for what that power could become. For the first time in her life, Princess Kestra understood what it meant to be truly beautiful. 6. Months after the battle at Theros Prime, the Valthak Empire looked nothing like it had before. Ships that once carried only weapons of war now transported medical supplies and farming equipment to worlds that had requested help rather than feared invasion. Trade agreements replaced conquest orders, and for the first time in centuries, other species approached Valthak space without terror. Princess Kestra stood in her private chambers, looking out at the bustling space station that had become the center of human Valthak cooperation. Where once she would have seen only military vessels preparing for the next conquest, now she watched cargo ships from dozens of different species coming and going peacefully. It still amazed her how much could change when fear was replaced with trust. A soft chime announced a visitor. Taemin entered, walking with only a slight limp that remained from his injuries. His left arm had healed well, though it would never be quite as strong as before. To Kestra, the scars he carried made him even more remarkable, proof of his willingness to sacrifice for others. The Zentari delegation just agreed to the trade agreement, he reported, settling into a chair that had been specially designed for human proportions. That makes 12 new partnerships this month. Kestra turned from the window, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The Zentari? They've refused to deal with anyone for over 50 years. How did you convince them? I didn't, Taemin replied. They specifically asked to work with you. Said they'd heard about a Valthak princess who protected the weak instead of conquering them. The words sent a warm feeling through Kestra's chest. Months ago, being known for protection would have felt like an insult to her warrior pride. Now, it felt like the greatest compliment she could receive. My father is calling another council meeting tomorrow, she said, her tone growing more serious. The old guard is getting nervous about all these changes. They think we're becoming soft. Are you worried? Kestra considered the question. The traditional Valthak nobles had been grumbling for weeks about their empire's new direction. Many still believed that strength could only come through domination, that showing mercy was the same as showing weakness. No, she said finally. I've learned something important from humans. Real confidence doesn't need to prove itself by hurting others. The next day, the great council chamber was packed. Every major noble family, every military commander, every political leader in the Valthak Empire had come to hear what their princess had to say about the future. The air was thick with tension as Kestra walked to the center of the circular chamber, her forearms visible and her bearing strong, but her demeanor calmer than anyone had ever seen before. Fellow Valthak, she began, her voice carrying easily, to every corner of the vast room. 6 months ago I stood here and told you about the strength I'd seen in our human allies. Many of you thought I'd lost my mind. Scattered chuckles rippled through the audience, though the tension remained. You were right to be concerned. I had lost something, my certainty that strength only comes from fear, that power only has meaning when it crushes others beneath it. Emperor Vorthan shifted uncomfortably on his throne. This wasn't going the way he'd hoped. But in losing that false certainty, I gained something far more valuable. I learned what it feels like to be followed, by choice rather than compulsion. To have others trust you not because they have to, but because they want to. Kestra gestured to the viewing screens around the chamber, which showed live feeds from across their space. Valthak engineers working alongside human scientists to develop new technologies. Valthak healers learning gentler medical techniques from human doctors. Young Valthak students attending schools where they learned diplomacy and cooperation instead of just combat tactics. Look around you, she continued. In 6 months, we've gained more real allies than we conquered in the previous 10 years. Species that once fled from our ships now actively seek us out for partnership. Our economy is stronger, our technology is advancing faster, and our people are discovering talents they never knew they had. General Corvin, one of her father's oldest advisors, stood up. Princess, with respect, we are warriors. This path you suggest makes us forget who we are, does it? Kestra challenged. Yunseo, one of the human survivors from the Harmony, told me something interesting last week. She said that humans have a phrase, the strongest people are not those who show strength in front of us, but those who win battles we know nothing about. She paused, letting the words sink in. Every day we win battles against our own worst impulses. Every time we choose to help instead of harm, to build instead of destroy, to trust instead of threaten. Those are victories that matter. Those are the battles that prove true strength. The chamber was absolutely silent now. I'm not asking you to stop being warriors, Kestra said. I'm asking you to become warriors worth following. Not because others fear what we might do to them, but because they believe in what we might accomplish together. As she looked around the room, Kestra saw something she'd never seen before in a Valthak political gathering. In the eyes of the younger nobles, the junior officers, even some of the older traditionalists, she saw hope. The same hope she'd learned to see in her own reflection, the hope that they could be something better than they'd ever dared to imagine. The diplomatic shuttle sat quietly in the docking bay. its Earth insignia gleaming under the station's bright lights. Tomorrow morning it would carry Taimin and the surviving members of his crew back home, their mission complete, and the alliance between Earth and the Valthak Empire stronger than anyone had dared hope. Kestra stood at the observation deck overlooking the bay, watching the final preparations through the transparent aluminum windows. Her forearms were crossed, and her usually confident posture seemed somehow smaller, more uncertain. The thought of Taimin leaving felt like losing something important, though she couldn't quite name what. "You're going to miss him." The voice belonged to Jiwoo, one of the human survivors who had chosen to stay behind as part of the new diplomatic corps. She approached slowly, her own injuries from the battle mostly healed, but still leaving her with a slight hesitation in her walk. "Miss him?" Kestra repeated as if the concept was foreign to her. "It's okay to admit it," Jiwoo said gently. "He changed your life. Changed all our lives, really. It's natural to feel sad when someone important goes away." Kestra was quiet for a long moment, watching as technicians loaded supplies onto the shuttle. "Before he came here, I thought I knew exactly who I was. The Emperor's weapon, the unstoppable warrior, the thing other species feared when they saw our ships. And now I don't know what I am. But somehow, that feels better than knowing." "Exactly what I was," Jiwoo smiled. "That's growth, Princess. It means you're becoming who you're supposed to be instead of just who you were told to be." An hour later, Kestra found herself walking through the quiet corridors toward Taimin's temporary quarters. The station operated on a day-night cycle to accommodate the various species living there, and most of the human areas were dimly lit now, simulating evening back on Earth. She pressed the door chime and waited. When Taimin opened the door, she was struck again by how small he looked compared to her, yet somehow his presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. "Kestra," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "I was hoping you'd come by." His quarters were simple but comfortable, with a small sitting area and a window that looked out at the stars. Personal items were scattered around, a photograph of Earth, some books written in human languages, a small plant that somehow thrived under the station's artificial light. "I have a question," Kestra said, settling carefully onto a reinforced chair designed to hold her weight. "The same question I've been asking for months." Taimin sat across from her, a knowing smile on his face. "About beauty. You called me beautiful the very first day we met, before you knew anything about me except that I was a warrior from a species known for conquest, before I saved anyone or changed anything about how the Empire works. Why?" Taimin leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. "Do you remember what you were doing when I first saw you? Walking out of a ship, I suppose, trying to intimidate you and your delegation. That's what you thought you were doing," he corrected. "But that's not what I saw." Kestra frowned. "What did you see?" "I saw someone who carried herself with perfect confidence, but wasn't cruel about it. Someone who could have had us killed or thrown off the station without a second thought, but instead was willing to listen to what we had to say. I saw power that was controlled, strength that was disciplined." He stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the stars. "But more than that, I saw someone who was tired, not physically tired, tired of being feared, tired of being alone at the top, tired of being seen as nothing but a weapon." Kestra felt something twist in her chest. "You saw all that from one meeting?" "I saw the way your eyes changed when you thought no one was looking. The way you stood a little straighter when you had to be the frightening princess, like you were putting on armor that didn't quite fit anymore." Taimin turned back to face her. "True beauty isn't about being perfect, Kestra. It's about being real. About having the courage to be vulnerable, to grow, to admit when you're wrong and try to do better. But I hadn't done any of that yet when you first called me beautiful." "No," he agreed. "But I could see that you wanted to. I could see that underneath all that armor and all those expectations, there was someone who cared about doing the right thing, not just the victorious thing." Kestra was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. "So when you called me beautiful, you weren't seeing who I was. You were seeing who I could become. I was seeing who you already were inside, the person you are now, the one who fights for others instead of just fighting, That person was always there, she just needed permission to come out. As she looked at him, sitting there in the soft light with his gentle smile and his scars from sacrifice, Kestra finally understood something that had been puzzling her for months. "You humans," she said slowly, "you don't just see what is. You see what could be. That's why you're so dangerous to people like my father. Not because you're physically strong, but because you make others believe they can be better than they are." Taimin nodded. "And that, Princess, is the most beautiful thing of all." 2 months after Taimin's departure, Princess Kestra stood in the center of the largest training facility on the Valthak homeworld. Around her, 50 young Valthak warriors sat in a circle on the floor, something that would have been unthinkable in traditional military training. Warriors were supposed to stand at attention, not sit casually like students in a classroom. "Today we're going to talk about something your previous instructors never taught you," Kestra began, her 4 arms relaxed at her sides. "We're going to talk about the difference between being feared and being respected." One of the younger trainees, a female named Vex with bright orange scales, raised her hand uncertainly. In the old system, asking questions during training was considered weakness. "Yes?" Kestra encouraged. "Princess, isn't fear more reliable? If someone fears you, they won't betray you." "Good question." Kestra began walking slowly around the circle. "Let me tell you about a human I knew. Commander Taimin. He was smaller than any of you, weaker than any of you, and had no natural weapons at all. Yet his crew was willing to die for him. Not because they feared him, but because they trusted him completely." She stopped walking and looked around the circle. When the harmony was dying, when they could have escaped in the pods and saved themselves, they chose to stay with their commander. They chose to keep fighting for people they'd never met. Fear could never inspire that kind of loyalty. Over the following weeks, the training sessions became the most popular part of military education. Young Valthak warriors who had been taught that strength meant intimidation were learning new concepts that challenged everything they'd believed. They practiced de-escalation techniques, studied the psychology of cooperation, and learned to see protection as a higher form of strength than domination. "The humans have a saying," Kestra explained during one session. "Anyone can become angry, that is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, this is not easy." She demonstrated by showing them footage from the recent peace negotiations with the Corvan Confederation. The Corvan had initially been hostile, expecting the typical Valthak approach of threats and ultimatums. Instead, they'd met with patience, understanding, and genuine offers of mutual benefit. "Watch their body language change," Kestra pointed out as the recording played. "At the beginning, they're defensive, ready for conflict. But as the conversation continues, as they realize we're actually listening to their concerns, they relax. They become partners instead of enemies." The transformation wasn't limited to military training. Throughout the Empire, Valthak citizens were discovering new ways to interact with other species. Doctors who had once treated only Valthak patients were learning human medical techniques that emphasized gentleness and emotional care alongside physical healing. Engineers were collaborating with human scientists on projects designed to help, rather than conquer. But perhaps the most dramatic change was happening in the imperial palace itself. Emperor Vorthan had watched his daughter's growing influence with a mixture of pride and concern. The old ways had served the empire well for centuries, but even he couldn't argue with the results of this new approach. "The trade revenues alone have increased by 300%, his chief advisor reported during their weekly briefing. "And our military hasn't had to fight a single battle in 4 months. The other species in this sector are actually asking for help instead of hiding from us." Vorthan studied the reports on his desk. Requests for Valthak assistance with everything from natural disasters to technological development, invitations to cultural exchanges, marriage proposals between Valthak and other species, something that had never happened before because no one had been brave enough to approach them romantically. "What does Kestra call this new philosophy?" he asked. "Protective strength, Your Majesty. The idea that true power comes from the ability to help others become stronger, not from making them weaker." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. His office window, he could see young Valtak warriors training in the courtyard below. But instead of the brutal combat exercises he remembered from his own youth, they were practicing something that looked almost like a dance, flowing movements that emphasized grace and control rather than raw aggression. "Schedule a meeting with Princess Kestra," he said finally. "I want to understand this human influence better." That evening, Kestra found her father in the palace gardens, a place he rarely visited. He was standing near a fountain, watching the water cascade down levels of carved stone. "Father, I've been thinking about your human friend," Emperor Vorthan said without turning around. "This Taimin who changed so much with just a few words." "He didn't change anything," Kestra corrected gently. "He just helped us see what was already there." "And what was that?" Kestra moved to stand beside him, looking into the clear water of the fountain. The understanding that being strong enough to destroy something is nothing compared to being strong enough to create something. The knowledge that the greatest warriors are those who make others feel safe, not those who make others feel afraid. Emperor Vorthan finally turned to look at his daughter. "You really believe this human way is better?" "I believe this human way is who we were always supposed to be. We just forgot somewhere along the way." In the distance, they could hear the sounds of laughter coming from the training grounds. Young Valthak warriors celebrating a successful exercise, their joy echoing through the evening air like music. For the first time in decades, the sound of his people's happiness made the Emperor smile. 1 year after that first awkward meeting in the docking bay, the great assembly hall of Nexus Station buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. Representatives from dozens of species filled the massive chamber, their varied forms creating a tapestry of colors, sizes, and shapes that would have been impossible to imagine just months before. At the center of it all sat humans and Valthak side by side, no longer strangers, but genuine partners. Princess Kestra stood backstage, looking at herself in a mirror that had been specially installed for the ceremony. She wore ceremonial armor, but not the brutal war gear of old Valthak tradition. This new design incorporated flowing lines and artistic elements inspired by human aesthetics, still unmistakably powerful, but beautiful in a way that invited admiration rather than fear. "Nervous?" asked Jiwoo, who had become something like a sister to Kestra over the past months. Terrified, Kestra admitted with a smile, "A year ago, the only speeches I gave were declarations of war. Now I'm supposed to talk about peace and cooperation." "Just speak from your heart," Jiwoo advised. "That's what Taemin would say if he were here." Kestra nodded, thinking of the human commander who was probably somewhere in Earth's solar system right now, helping to prepare his own people for this new age of galactic cooperation. His physical presence was missed, but his influence lived on in every word she was about to speak. The ceremony began with traditional elements from both cultures. Valthak war drums thundered through the hall, but instead of the aggressive rhythms used for battle, they played the newer ceremonial beats that Kestra had helped develop. Powerful but welcoming, strong but not threatening. Human musicians joined in with their own instruments, creating a harmony that seemed to represent everything the Alliance stood for. When Kestra finally walked onto the stage, the entire assembly rose to their feet. But instead of the fearful silence that had once greeted her appearances, there was genuine applause. She could see families in the audience, Valthak parents who had brought their children to witness this historic moment, human diplomats who had worked tirelessly to make this day possible, and representatives from species who had never dreamed they could stand in the same room as Valthak without fearing for their lives. "Friends," Kestra began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's sound system. "1 year ago, I didn't know that word could apply to anyone outside my own species. I thought strength meant standing alone, that power meant making others smaller." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces watching her. "Then I met a human, who called me something I'd never been called before. He called me beautiful. I was confused, angry even. How could a warrior be beautiful? How could someone who had spent her life conquering others be anything but fearsome?" In the front row, she spotted Emperor Vorthan, her father, listening intently. His own transformation over the past year had been remarkable, from a ruler who demanded absolute obedience to one who genuinely sought the counsel of his advisors and the well-being of his people. It took me months to understand what that human meant. Beauty isn't about being perfect or untouchable. Beauty is about making others feel safe enough to be their best selves. Beauty is about using your strength to lift others up instead of keeping them down. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Today, we're not just signing a treaty between Earth and the Valthak Empire. We're creating something new, a partnership that proves different species can work together not just to survive, but to thrive. And that partnership is beautiful. As she spoke the word, Kestra felt something she'd never experienced before. Complete certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. To my human friends, thank you for teaching us that cooperation is stronger than conquest, that protecting others is more heroic than defeating them. You showed us that true warriors fight for something greater than themselves. She turned to address the Valthak delegation. To my own people, thank you for having the courage to change, for proving that we can honor our warrior traditions while embracing compassion, for showing the galaxy that evolution isn't weakness, it's the ultimate strength. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Kestra wasn't finished. This alliance is just the beginning. We're going to carry these ideals throughout the galaxy. We're going to show every species we meet that there's a better way than fear and domination. We're going to prove that the most beautiful thing in the universe isn't the power to destroy, but the wisdom to create. As the formal documents were signed and the ceremony concluded, Kestra found herself surrounded by well-wishers from dozens of worlds. Children who wanted to touch her scales, diplomats eager to discuss future cooperation, warriors from other species asking about the new Valthak training methods. But the moment that meant the most came when a small Valthak youngling approached her, barely tall enough to reach her waist. "Princess Kestra," the child said in a voice full of wonder, "when I grow up, I want to be a beautiful warrior just like you." Kestra knelt down to the child's level, her golden eyes bright with emotion. "You already are, little one. You already are." As the celebration continued around them, Princess Kestra looked up at the stars visible through the station's transparent dome. Somewhere out there, Taemin was probably looking at those same stars, perhaps wondering how his simple act of seeing beauty in an unlikely place had changed the course of galactic history. The warrior princess who had once been feared across the galaxy smiled, knowing that the most beautiful chapter of her story was just beginning.